everybody, and greetings from cold northern New England and Maine. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person. Hopefully we'll make that up when I come to the PICMET conference next August, and I'm looking forward to that very much. And thank you very much for inviting me, and congratulations on this exciting event, this exciting symposium. During the next few minutes, what I would like to do is share with you some thoughts I have on the emerging shape, particularly of US innovation, but also innovation around the world, and the possible impact of our responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. And indeed, like the previous speaker, my message is actually one of optimism. I think after this crisis is over, after we've absorbed the learning, after we've dealt with the challenges to deal with new challenges that society faces in the 21st century. And so I'll share with you some of my thoughts based on my own experience, my past research, and my current research and innovation, and my dealings with industry. The first thing I would like to say is that I believe that innovation is a very complex topic. It's dynamic. It's gone through many different eras and stages and attributes since the World War II has ended up to the current phase. We had innovation in government. We had innovation with big projects in the 50s and 60s, particularly in defense and infrastructure. Of course, we had the rise of R&D and global R&D and technology strategy in corporations. And in the United States in particular, and then around the world, we had the rise of high-tech entrepreneurialism with the rise of the internet, Silicon Valley, and so on. And now we have entered a phase, I think, where we are getting dynamic blends of all these different kinds of innovation on both a local and global basis to deal with issues that we face today, where no one type of innovation can do it all. We need collaboration, we need cooperation, we need what I call creative tensions in order to deal with the problems that we face, including the pandemic. And even in my own experience, we've seen these waves, sometimes successful, transform societies. I worked for 6 years in France, starting a new high-tech business school as an academic dean. And I saw how even in France, we had the TGV, we had nuclear energy, very successful. And where I was in Sophia Antipolis, the French decided as a major project to create their own Silicon Valley, which was successful up to a point. Of course, not everything that the French did was successful in big ideas. Minitel, a sort of a dumb terminal idea, was eclipsed by the internet and it didn't succeed. But in France, we see how innovation can transform societies. And then I worked in New York City for 14 years. I came back from France, and I was there and really part of the rise of New York City being reinvented, not just a corporate headquarters, not just a center of finance or a cultural center, but New York became a hub of high-tech entrepreneurialism. And indeed, it was reinvented, particularly under Mayor Bloomberg. And I was part of that. We set up an institute in what was called Silicon Alley in Lower Manhattan. And we also saw the rebirth of Brooklyn at the same time. And so we saw how innovation can transform cities, make cities vibrant, important hubs of creativity, creating entirely new industries and energizing cities, even cities that were global, so that they became even more vibrant than we were before. I believe that this will continue and be extremely important in the future. Of course, innovation went through some very, very difficult times. You see on the screen a plane that was never built. Massive amounts of money went into the American supersonic transport, but in the end, the government never built it with the private sector. And it failed. It failed for economic reasons and environmental reasons and reasons that have to do with activism to protect the environment. And it was really one of the first issues that we now see in an era of global change becoming more important, where, as was said by earlier today, technology is not enough. We also need ethical concerns, environmental concerns, and that we saw in the 60s with the SST. On the upper right, you see what was once Bell Labs, perhaps the preeminent apparatus for innovation and R&D in the United States and the world, where all kinds of technologies were developed. But once AT&T was deregulated, once there was competition, once AT&T was broken up, Bell Labs lost its position of preeminence, of singular preeminence. And it lost it really to high-tech entrepreneurialism, to innovation, to companies like Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Instagram, Uber, and so on. So we had a transformation of innovation where some things declined and others emerged. My view, by the way, is even these great companies that we see today are not enough. They are insufficient to deal with the problems that we face. They are part of the solution, but they are not the whole solution. And what we have emerging in the world today, even before the pandemic, is a rebirth, a rise of a new kind of macro innovation, a new kind of set of creative blends. I call it macro innovation. I call it macro innovation 2.0. Excuse the phone. So I call it macro innovation 2.0. And I'm going to give 3 examples of how we are already dealing with innovation in a new broad-based way today, even before the pandemic hit us. The first is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence we all know about. Some people say it's what they call a general purpose technology, transformational, like electrification, modern information technology, and so on, the steam engine. And different regions are creating their own strategies to deal with it. For example, in the United States, we have government reports looking at whether we should have a national strategy. Do we need more money? Does government need to be involved? Or do we leverage our own creativity and entrepreneurial nature? In the EU, where I spent 6 years working in Hungary, they have developed their own strategies and papers for AI, and they are concerned about being left behind, But they're all also concerned about privacy and about the ethical consequences, the social consequences of AI. At the same time, in China, there's a different point of view where AI is seen as a general purpose technology and as a linchpin to catapult China into leadership in the 21st century technology world. AI is at the center. It's at the anchor. It is an anchor for China to leapfrog and become a leader in the world in innovation and technology. And it is a more centralized approach, a more managed approach, an explicit approach to use AI for the rise of China in innovation. And we are worried about it. We have reports dealing questioning whether, in fact, this is a challenge for the United States. In my view, AI will become a competitive, collaborative ecosystem, battleground for innovation competition for the next number of decades. I worked for 8 years in Hungary running a business school. Hungary is a little country, 10 million people. It's in Central Eastern Europe. It was under communist rule until 1989, 90. And even in Hungary, which is not a leader in innovation in terms of the rankings, even in Hungary, AI is considered important. There are government programs in that, and there are coalitions of government, industry, universities. In this case, the AI coalition in Hungary has approximately 150 members, the last I looked. So even in a country like Hungary, AI is seen as a transformational technology in order to leapfrog into the future. AI is also seen by people in Africa as a way to leapfrog, as a way to deal with health, transportation, education, and food, and what's called smart agriculture, agritech. And I've seen this when I visited Africa, when I visited Nigeria in particular. So again, we are seeing a new era of innovation emerge from the perspective of AI as a general purpose technology. But it's not just AI. As I said with regard to New York City before, cities are transformation and regions are becoming smarter. My friends at the Intelligent Community Forum every year since 2002 have chosen the top 7 and then the most intelligent community of the year. And it's a global activity. As you can see from the slide, from Europe, Asia, Korea has had cities as intelligent communities in many, many years, and it's number one for several years, as has your neighbor Taiwan, as has Europe, and in the States. So again, we're seeing how innovation, these creative blends of macro innovation are becoming important in smart cities. In Europe, where I spent a lot of time in Eindhoven in the Netherlands, we see the rise of Brainport, where Eindhoven is a hub for a smart region transforming itself to become a leader in high-tech, high-tech automotive design, food, life tech, and other areas. In particular, Eindhoven, not that many years ago, was the hometown, the headquarters town of a company called Philips. It was old industry. Philips left Eindhoven to go elsewhere to become part of the 21st century. The top building is the old Philips R&D headquarters, kind of like Bell Lab. It was abandoned by Philips. Today, that building houses all kinds of new small startups. It's a kind of incubator. I'll talk about that later. And Philips rediscovered Eindhoven, the new transformed Eindhoven, and came back with a new R&D center. You see that below the screen on the university campus. It's a remarkable story, a remarkable cycle to look at. In Africa, in Lagos, which has all kinds of problems, it is also a hub for innovation. It is in Lagos that we see the rise of the second largest film industry in the world called Nollywood. It started about 10, 15 years ago with handheld, maybe 20 years ago with handheld cameras on the street. It's now a huge cinema industry in Africa and throughout the world. We also see government supporting innovation incubators. It's not enough to leave it to the private sector. And so in the UK, we have the government supporting what it calls startup factories, managed activities to create more innovation and entrepreneurship. This is a matter of policy in the 21st century. Again, if we go back to Lagos, Nigeria for a moment, we see that there's an area in Lagos. It doesn't look like much when you look at it, but when you go in the buildings, you can see it. It's called Yaba or Yabakan Valley. And that is a Silicon Valley in Africa, in West Africa, where all kinds of startups are there. You see Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook has a facility there. Google has a facility there. And it also has an AI hub, AI incubator. And so Lagos, Nigeria, which doesn't even have a metro, even though it has 25 million people, is a center of innovation and cinema. And this is an example of what can take place today. So already, even before the pandemic hit us, even before we were confronted with the crisis that we now have, already the world was changing in Europe, in the United States, in Asia, in Africa, and elsewhere, as we put together creative blends, new ways to deal with our problems, whether it's cities, AI, innovation clusters, clean tech, sustainability, and so on. And now I would like to turn to what I think the role of the COVID pandemic may be in shaping our innovation future. What we see, I believe, if you look at this chart, is a number of creative tensions, choices that are being made to deal with the pandemic. And it isn't either or, they are not mutually exclusive, but they are, I think, elements that we have to consider in developing a strategy for the pandemic. Some nations have taken short-term, immediate steps. And we look at nations like New Zealand, for example, and Taiwan and others, others are more long-term and strategic. I think, and I'll come back to this in a moment, Operation Warp Speed in the United States is a medium-term, strategic, technological choice that the United States has made for a variety of reasons. Sometimes we apply existing technology to mitigate. Other times we look at advanced technology, maybe unproven technology. Again, the United States seems to be emphasizing a technological solution. Sometimes the technology used are bounded, they're limited. There's one single technology. Other times there's a diversity, a variety of technologies. Again, Operation Warp Speed seems to be funding a variety, a selection of technologies, a selection of different kinds of technological solutions, and so on. Sometimes we integrate existing technologies. Sometimes we try to integrate existing new and advanced technology. We have decentralized approaches and more centralized approaches. And we try to activate the bottom up, middle up, versus a kind of a top-down structure. In the United States, we are trying to leverage states. It's a more federalist solution. Whereas in other countries, maybe smaller countries, or even larger ones, it's much more centralized. Sometimes we leverage a single sector. Sometimes we leverage all the sectors, public and private. Sometimes we emphasize operational, immediate concerns. Other times we are much more strategic in our orientation, more long-term. And I also want to emphasize the issue of risk. How do we allow for and accept risk? If we allow for risk and accept it, it could be costly. Or do we buy our way out, at least for financial risk? In the United States, we have identified risk and we bought it out. Sometimes we use conventional methods that we understand, and other times we are trying to use state-of-the-art professional management, project management methods. I think if we turn to the United States and we look, for example, at Operation Warp Speed, it is clear when you look at the diagrams that come out of this out of this activity, out of this attempt to deal with the pandemic, and I'm just showing them to you right now, they are clearly, it's clearly very complex. There's an acceptance of complexity in an attempt to manage it as a matter of management, as a matter of professionalism, as a matter of strategy, as a matter of organization. Operation Warp Speed is a massive attempt to deal with this problem over at least a medium-term issue. Not immediately, but and to accelerate it where we can accelerate it. So there's innovation, there's management, there's prior and making things very, very explicit. Another aspect of Operation Warp Speed that I want to emphasize here is that it includes both the government and private industry. It includes the civilian sector and the military sector. Indeed, the military sector is playing a key role in the supply chain, in creating the supply chain, a major role. And finally, we are dealing with risk. We are dealing with risk by buying our way out of risk, by guaranteeing markets, by guaranteeing the need for production, by paying for the production for some. And if it doesn't work, we will just put those products in the ground and carry them. So we are learning and we are developing a supply chain. We're developing new packaging. We are dealing with this in an explicit, managed, professional way. And those of us who teach technology management, project management, strategic management, operations management, understand this very well. It will be a good case study. And so I'd like to conclude by saying what I think all this means, And I think what it means is we are learning how to accumulate knowledge. Out of this pandemic, I hope we will learn what works and what doesn't work, and we will keep it in our inventory, in our knowledge inventory. We are learning how to apply professional management and advanced management practices, including AI. We are comfortable with risks. We are comfortable operating with uncertainty. We are comfortable with leveraging entrepreneurialism. We are comfortable applying short-term and long-term solutions. We are comfortable with the inclusion of variety, and I think this will give us confidence for the future. As we integrate and apply all these methods to deal with the pandemic, as we leverage what we're learning about smart cities, AI, sustainability, and innovation clusters as well, this will give us confidence to deal with other issues, health issues, environmental issues, all kinds of issues in the future. So I am optimistic that out of this, we will be a better place in the future, and innovation in technology management will play a key role. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you at this impressive conference.